I do have a question in my mind, which might be a good jumping off point into your origin story and a bunch of other things, which is, this beat I have in my head that I learned at MSM, like the first summer I was there. I did a video about, but it's like button to bump bump ba dum bum do da boom.
You're talking about the kaida, right? One of the kaidas.
Yeah, where does that come from?
That's a tabla composition. Kregi na dati dage tu na kregi na nakatati dage na dati dage tu na ge na kreki na tati tage tu na kreki na nakatati dage na dati dage tu na ge. That's what that is. Yeah.
So I remember my first summer at MSM, which must have been, I think it was the summer of 2001, and Alex, I forget his last name. Yeah, Alex Hoskins. I'd be walking by his practice room. He was playing that. I'm like, what in the Sam Hill is that? He's like, oh, this is Dan's thing. You have to check out Dan. And for some reason, I was just intrigued by it. So I learned it, and then I learned it over triplets. Mm-hmm. And then I must have ingrained it because, yeah, as I said on Instagram, now, particularly if it's been a stressful week, as I'm getting ready for bed, I'll just have it playing in my head. It's like my nervous tabla riff.
Yeah, it's a fun one. It's good. That really opened things up for me. That was one of the first ones I really started working on pretty hard, so it's fun.
What was your first exposure to drums? Because I'm interested in where tabla fell in the choreography. Like, did you start out playing straight ahead jazz? Did you start out playing another kind of music? Yeah, what's the origin story?
It was basically, my dad's record collection. So hearing Led Zeppelin 4, that was the one for me. As a young kid, and I remember, holding the record, trying to decipher the lyrics, but just hearing Zeppelin, that was kind of how it all started for me.
Is that the one that begins with Black Dog?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was really my intro to music. So he was, he was into Zeppelin and Hendrix and The Who and Cream and Steely Dan and, things like that. So that was my first exposure to music. And we used to play together, like a little duo, just drums and guitar when I was pretty young. So classic rock was my entrance into music for sure.
And how old were you when you started getting into jazz?
Probably 14. And in between then, there was some other, there was like progressive rock, and then there was metal and some other stuff. But yeah.
And what was the arc between age 14 and when we ended up at MSM at the same time, with you already playing a bunch of shit nobody had ever seen?
Well, I had a really great drum teacher. I had a lot of great drum teachers, but before I started at MSM, I had a teacher named Jeff Krause, who actually taught at MSM, the preparatory division. Probably, he was out by the time we both got there. And he was always, he was the one who really gave me the first jazz records. He lent me a couple jazz records, but also, I studied some frame drums with him before I had studied frame drums with Jamey Haddad. So this guy Jeff was a big part of my development, and then I started studying frame drums with Jamey Haddad, and then he's like, you should check out tabla. So then I did. So then I started with Samir, and I was, I guess, in my third year of college at that point. So yeah, 14 through college years were just pretty much blinders on.
How many hours a day would you say you were practicing during that period, if you had to guess?
Oh, I don't know. It was just all consuming all day,
And was it goal directed, like you wanted to have this or that gig, or was it purely exploratory, like you're fascinated by this and you just want to go deeper?
Yeah, I was never about that, trying to get this gig or that gig, but it was pretty exploratory, trying to get better at certain things. I remember one year, John, you studied with John, correct, Riley? Mm-hmm. One year, I think my second year there, he was like, you got a lot of great rhythmic information, and you got a lot of great ideas, and you got a good feel, but you got to get your sound together. I guess so. Um, so I started really working hard on just sound, and um, I remember just like one summer I was just playing the cymbal, just took the cymbal away from the drum set and did that for months, and started thinking about sound, and it was just all encompassing for a while.
Yeah, that actually reminds me, I think it might have been like 2003. I took a lesson with you, maybe one of the weeks you were subbing for John. And I think you told me something similar, or you told me my ride cymbal was the bottleneck, the limiting factor.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you told me that very story about taking the cymbal away from the kit. So for like the next 6 months, like I probably spent an hour a day just playing the cymbal with recordings in addition to whatever else I was doing on the kit. But what do you think John meant by working on your sound? And what do you mean if you tell that to students? Is it ride cymbal touch in general? What do you think?
I think touch in general. For me, it was maybe a lack of maybe cohesion and just the way that the whole drum set was speaking.
Yeah.
I think, it's about really listening to what you're doing when you're practicing and when you're playing. If I have students and something's not, maybe could be better with the sound, I might approach it from a lot of different angles. It could be a technical thing that might be, holding someone's sound up, like maybe someone's a little bit, their foot on the hi-hat might be, maybe a little too high. So you maybe experiment with that. How does that affect the sound of the chick? Or, if you use a little more finger or a little more wrist, how does that affect the sound of the ride cymbal? Or, if you approach this like, maybe with a little more molar stroke, so it could be a lot of different things. It could be technique, how the technique impacts the sound, how the feel, impacts the sound. So a lot of things. No one size fits all. Hitting the center of the drum,
Yeah.
being conscious of those kind of things. Where you're hitting the drum, just simple things.
I can't think about hitting the center of the drum without thinking about Hutch and Bill Stewart, because those guys are both sticklers for that. But it's important. I was also thinking as you were talking that maybe a good analogy would be like developing an accent in a language, where like jazz drumming, and I'm starting to think a lot more about this now that I'm teaching some students specifically how to play jazz, but it's very, very subtle. And other musics are extremely subtle too, but you can play a good facsimile of a jazz beat. Like if you're coming from rock music and you've got good coordination, let alone prog rock or something, you can play Spangaling on the cymbals. You can get out John's book and play the comping exercises, and you can get there in like 48 hours. And maybe a good analogy for like developing beyond that is the difference between like faking an English accent and actually having a real one. I don't know how that lands.
That's an interesting analogy. Yeah, I could see that. A lot of it is just a lot of time spending listening to the music, and I think a lot of it is the ratios of dynamics in between the limbs. I think that's a big part of it, which takes a long time to really put into practice.
Not only does it take a long time, but it's really, really difficult to be fully creative while you're still developing that. Because from my experience, at least, you're in a headspace where you're like looking for a benchmark. Like, is this right? How does this compare to the jazz greats? And that's a difficult headspace to just sort of give yourself permission to create. Do you feel like, did you ever feel that dilemma, or did you were you able to sort of end run it by putting all those hours in your teenage years?
I think everyone goes through that. I definitely went through that. Everyone's got doubts, and everybody puts themselves up. Oh, maybe I should be sounding like this. I think that's only natural. But as you get older, I'm sure you've experienced it. You don't really care. Once you get to a certain point, you're like, I'm me, and then you try to instill those things in the students. Like you can only be you. You can't be anybody else, and you got to embrace that.
Yeah, it's like you're gradually learning the accent, but then the words you choose can be individual to you. To segue into some stuff I saw on your Instagram and things you've been practicing lately, what do you love so much about Frankie Dunlop?
What I love so much about Frankie Dunlop, I love his feel. I love his creativity, his choices. I think there's a lot of great drummers who play with Monk, but I think he's my favorite. He's my favorite drummer to complement Monk. I guess him or Blakey. I just feel like he fit in with Monk so well. His language, the way that his body looks when he's playing, the way that his hands look, it's really gorgeous. Really reminds me of Papa Joe Jones in a way. That elegance, that he had when he played. So yeah, he's definitely had a big influence on me. And I don't know if he was a lefty or if he was ambidextrous, but a lot of the things that he does, I think are very unique. Like you don't see a lot of drummers start with the left hand, on a high tom, and the way that he would move around the set. It's pretty unique stuff, I think. And the way he goes from cymbal to cymbal, it's really, really beautiful.
Yeah,
his sound, is beautiful. His touch, everything, his beat.
Was he an early influence, or did you get into him later on?
He was pretty early because I remember getting the VHS. There were VHS tapes in this place in Teaneck. I grew up in North Jersey, so there was this VHS store, and they used to have a bunch of jazz videos. And then there was one with the Monk Quartet. I think it was from Tokyo. We're so lucky now we could see these things on YouTube so readily. But back then in the 90s, mid 90s, it wasn't so easy to come by. So I remember really studying that video a lot, and trying to learn some of his stuff. So he wasn't as early as someone like a Max Roach or Art Blakey or Elvin Jones, but he was kind of early.
So you mentioned Max and Art Blakey. Who else were sort of your primary influences when you first started playing jazz?
It's Max Roach, Art Blakey, Elvin Jones. One of the first records I got was Basie Straight Ahead, so that was Harold Jones. So him, Tony Williams. When I heard Tony Williams, I was astounded. Roy Haynes, all the people that most people, you have the sentence of of the greats. And it wasn't until a little later that I started going a little, researching more, and then, getting into other guys, and then for going further back when I got a little older, to the swing era drummers and like Papa Joe and Big Sid and Gene Krupa, and then, but yeah, those are definitely the primary influences. The first ones, I mean, Max and Art Blakey and Elvin. I got to see Elvin, luckily enough. Max, Tony.
And is there a moment you can pinpoint when you sort of kindled that love? Like, was there an old record lying around in your dad's collection, or did you go to a gig, or what jump started it?
The two records that my teacher lent me, which was Clifford Brown, Max Roach and Clifford Brown. I guess it doesn't really matter who comes first. It was a collective group, but it was really Max's group. But the Basin Street record, which is still one of my favorites. The one with "What Is This Thing Called Love" and "I'll Remember April" and "Time," the beautiful Richie Powell tune. That record was really the one that did it for me. And then also hearing Basie Straight Ahead, and then Blue Train with Philly. I forgot to mention Philly Joe. He was one of the first two. I remember going to. I was in like a freshman in high school, and I was just asked, hey, could I borrow a nickel? Or could I borrow a dime? Sometimes you would just ask people to borrow change. Back when you're in high school for whatever, and I got enough money to because I wanted to go get Blue Train. So I got enough money, and I walked to the record store, and I had all these dimes and nickels and quarters, and I got Blue Train, and because I really wanted that so bad. So that was another early record for me. That was a really big one. Mm-hmm. That's still one of my favorite Train pre Elvin.
Yeah, it's a classic. If we fast forward to now, what proportion of your day-to-day playing would you say is jazz versus other genres, and like how does that break down?
It's hard for me to, I guess, put it into those terms. I don't necessarily think in those terms. I just kind of play. I'm definitely kind of studying all the time, whether it be, Max Roach or Louis Hayes, or, it could be a hip hop beat, it could be a metal thing, it could be an Indian thing. So, Brazilian, I don't know. So I don't know about percentage of that kind of thing, but I definitely, for instance, lately I've been listening to a lot of Louis Armstrong, from like the late 20s, like right after the Hot Fives and Hot Sevens, 28, 29, and really trying to get inside of that. But I'm always listening to a lot of things and working some stuff out at the drum set. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, most of the gigs I do are in the improvised realm, mm-hmm. to some degree or another. Some are more improvised, some are less improvised, but so.
And how would you say it breaks down between like band leading, like projects you're spearheading and writing for, versus sideman stuff?
62-38 for sideman versus leader, or 64-36 maybe, and a higher percentage being sideman, 36 lower percentage being leader.
36 is pretty good though. You're still finding time to do your own stuff.
Yeah, it's been a goal to do more and more as the years go by, and a lot of the times I'll be working something out, and I'll try to bridge the gap in terms of like a drum idea or a drum part, and like make that the basis of a composition. So I've been doing that more and more, over the last several years, to try to bridge the gap. Try to bridge the gap between the practice room and composition.
Meaning you might have a gig that you're a sideman on, but you make inventing a drum part of the process as a way to inject some creativity and sort of hybridize the practice performance thing.
More as a leader, if I'm writing, yeah. So it's more the writing process. It's a lot more part of the writing process than it was maybe 20 years ago, or 15 years ago. Having the drums generate the idea.
When I used to write, definitely some of the best ideas came from the drums. I think there was a point where I sort of abandoned trying to be more harmonically complex than the things I would hear organically, and just focus on simple ideas. And I think my writing got better at that point.
Yeah, it's a good strategy. Do what feels natural to you.
Yeah. What would you say is the biggest difference between the way you practice now versus, say, 20 years ago or when you were in school?
I guess a couple things. One thing, when I was in school, I hadn't had all the years of tabla practice that I have now. And so It was definitely focused back then in school, but now it's a different level of focus. That's one thing. The other thing is that back then it wasn't really like a meditation or a spiritual kind of journey practicing, but now it is. And the other thing is just trusting the process more. I trusted it back then, but I guess trusting it to a point like, it's okay if things don't come out on a gig. It's okay if it's just this thing that you're immersed in the practice room. If you're working hard and if you're getting joy out of what you're doing, things are going to fall into place in one way or another. So having that perspective, right, when you're 20, it's more about I want to get this thing so I can incorporate it into this. At least for me, I'm sure a lot of people are the same way. But it's kind of less about that now. It's more just about enjoying the journey and having faith in it and putting the work in.
I've felt a similar arc between being super goal directed and then eventually kind of giving myself permission to just explore what was interesting. Yeah. When you say it's more meditative now, can you talk about what that means?
Yeah, I might just play something like I was working on these flam 3-2-1. It's like a flam right left right. It's like a 6-unit cell. So I was just doing that and not thinking about where it's going to go, but just hanging out there for a long time. Like gong 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 geek 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 geek, and just staying there for a long time. Which is a lot of times we do that in Tabla, just staying there. And then a lot of times things just happen. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's just about being immersed in the sound and just, feeling the way it feels under your hands or something. So it's just a way to kind of go deep into something and just forgetting about everything, just zoning in and yeah, like meditating or something.
Like paying really close attention. And then when it seems like there's nothing there, as you increase the acuity of your ability to notice, you realize there's a lot. The subtleties of the drum sound, the way the sticks feel in your hands, the subtleties of the time, etc. And also being patient and allowing ideas to either come to you or not. And that's been hard for me. It's getting easier, but there's always this voice that says you should play something else. And then you're wondering like, well, is this the point to inject something else or do I stay with it? And it actually reminds me, I think we talked about this when we were both at MSM, but we both took lessons with Jamey Haddad, and he had this thing that he showed me that was just like a triplet based ostinato that was New Orleans-esque, but also sort of like a Philly Joe sextuplet type of sticking. So it would almost be like, I'll try to sing it. With the right hand sticking da 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 da, and the left hand filling in. So like if you speed that up, like it's Philly Joe, but he would ask me to play that like slowly, and then just with kick drum on 1 and 3 and hats on 2 and 4, and he's just like, don't do anything else, just play that. And I remember just thinking, but then what? Like, what's supposed to happen from that? And I'm still not totally sure. Like, did you have a similar experience with Jamey, or if not, like, I'm just interested if you have an angle on that.
Like, if you get like impatient with something, or what's the point of staying here? Maybe.
I guess the thing I always considered over the years is like, am I doing it right? And what's this supposed to look like? And then like more broadly, sort of like, what does he expect will happen if I just play this hours at a time, day after day?
I think it's one way to really pay, being aware of what you're doing, and being aware of sound, and I think that goes a long way. There's a lot of value to that. And then a lot of the times when you play one thing, you get a lot of ideas. You also, it's a way to build restraint, I think.
Yeah.
It's a way to, feel how your body is moving when you're playing one thing for a while. So I think there's a lot of value in that. And also, if you're really focused, it's a good way to improve on certain things, do that, and sometimes maybe take a break, sometimes split it up. There's a lot of different ways to, as practice something. There's no one way. There's a lot of different approaches. That's one approach. There's different approaches too,
Well, that Tabla ostinato we began the conversation talking about is another such thing, isn't it? Where it's just something you can repeat, kind of get into. Maybe it generates ideas. Clearly it gets in your head, and maybe part of it is what's happening as it plays on loop in your head when you're away from the drum kit or away from the tablas. And maybe you're cooking food or taking a shower and your mind is just free associating things that go into it. And then the next time you sit down at the kit or at the tablas, then maybe you have more ideas sort of preloaded.
Yeah, and also that type of composition is a theme and variation. It's called kaida. So the deeper you get into it, like the more endless it becomes, because the variations in the kaida, it's like really like a theme and variation type of composition. The variations, the way that you develop the theme, is really something that that you study, and that it takes a lot of time to understand the logic of that. And then so by playing a theme for a long time, you start to hear the different phrases in the theme, or the phrase, whatever you're playing, and you start to see it from a different lens, a different perspective, so that when you think about variations or embellishing that theme or idea, you have more of a perspective, because you've sat with it for a long time.
Well, to change topics a little bit, you've got a Patreon, you've got a pretty active Instagram, but you're also very, very analog. Like, you got into jazz, you got into the old masters first. You had what sounds like a vinyl record collection. So what inspired you to get online in a big way, and just how's that been going?
Inspired it. I mean, I didn't join Instagram until I think 2016, and I don't know why I did, but I can't remember what the impetus. There was no impetus. I think I was in Maine on a little vacation, and I saw this he had this weird tattoo on the lower back, and I took a picture of it, and I think I might have posted it. I don't know what I was doing, but I think that was the first post ever. I guess when I did those videos on YouTube a little while ago, one with the auctioneer and the FedEx thing, I guess that was a little taste into the online thing, and that was probably 10 years ago. And the Patreon thing started before the pandemic, which I was lucky about that. It was a good thing to start in 2019, as opposed to when a lot of people started in 2020, 2021. That was just a way to try to stay home more. I got a kid; she's 7, so it was just a very practical thing. Travel less and be here more for my kid. And so I think that the Instagram thing kind of goes hand in hand with the Patreon. I don't know if I would be so active if I didn't have a Patreon. Maybe I would now, but I don't know. But I'm sure that the Patreon is a big driver in that.
How much in-person teaching are you doing these days?
I try to limit it to about between 15 and 20 a month.
Yeah, I just started doing Zoom stuff, and that's really interesting. What are
I'd
the
much
biggest
rather
differences?
have in person. It was really a nice breath of fresh air when people started coming back over. After COVID, it was really nice. But I still have some Zoom students too, which are great. They're all,
There's
I think, great.
Yeah, there are definitely things you can do with a student in the room with you that are more difficult remotely. On the other hand, you have greater reach. You can reach people all over the world, etc. I asked this of practically everybody who's been teaching a while, but what are the biggest differences you see, if you've observed any, between students now versus like 20 years ago?
No one's messing around these days. I don't. Just in terms of my experience with my students, you know, no one's no one's taking any part of it lightly.
You feel like everybody's super goal directed, like they come in already knowing what they want?
Not even goal directed, but they're ready to work. They're ready to be on time. They're ready to really get better. They're ready to, you know, it's really a privilege that my students. It's really great. I got a great bunch of students. Um, there's the obvious things. Everyone has a lot of access to a lot more, but at the same time, I feel like even though that's the case now, I feel like my students are a lot more focused now than they were um, maybe 20 years ago. But it's tough to remember. I was so young back then, and so it's tough to have a real objective perspective. But all I can say now is that yeah, the students are great and not playing around.
Do you think that could be partly a function of your profile and the people who are seeking you out explicitly to take lessons with you?
Yeah, could be that too.
So it's a good position to be in. I mean, my only experience from right after graduating was teaching at a storefront music school in Jersey, where most of the people who were there didn't want to be there. And so about 2005, 2006, I decided teaching is not for me. I hate this. And I'm glad I gave it a second try, because now that the people I teach sought me specifically, there's a much different level of engagement and a much different level of motivation.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a similar thing. People seek you out because they want to seek you out, and then people don't want to waste their time. They don't want to waste their money if that's the case.
Well, I also asked this one of everybody, but what do you think is the biggest difference for a drummer who's, say, graduating from school and starting to gig now versus 25 years ago? Is it better or worse?
I mean, now versus 20, there were always great players. 25 years ago, but now it's just like, you know, you have so many great players. So I think it might be a little harder because there's so many players now that are at such a high level. So I think it's maybe a little harder for that reason. I mean, I don't, there's a lot more competition now, I think, back 20, than there was 25 years ago.
Yeah, that's true. But also more opportunities to play. So it's like, how do you weigh those, right? It's very subjective.
That's true. Yeah, it's tough to say. Just know that nowadays it's just phenomenal. There's so many phenomenal players. You got to really have something special, or you know, just have a really great feel or have a really great attitude. But you have to have something that people are going to wanna they're going to want to be around you for some reason. It might not even need to be necessarily you play a certain unique thing. It could just be your vibe, which is great. People want to be around you, or
Yeah.
you got a great beat or whatever.
Well, this has been great. Where would you send people first and foremost to check out what you're doing, what you're up to these days?
I'd say check out the Patreon page. I put up lessons every week. Now I put them up every Friday, so this is the 230th week I've been doing it.
Doing that for a hot minute.
Haven't missed 1 week in all those years. So I'd say check that out, and then if you want to see me play or something, check my website out. And yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for the convo.
Thanks for having me, Nate.